Hello there, lovely listeners and viewers. You are back down the red rabbit hole. What took you so long? We've been waiting for you. And we have a guest. Lisa has been out with her sack, haven't you, Lisa?
Have, yeah, always, every week.
And I
Track
don't know
them down.
whether you've noticed on Facebook and her other socials, she's training at the moment, aren't you? In like triple speed.
Yeah,
It's just
I wish
making
it was
me.
as fast as the videos that I put out. That'd be a lot quicker. No, I think I must have an addiction to one of these charity things now. This is my third one this year of doing something for a month. And this one is sweat every day in November for Stand Up to Cancer. So I'm doing some exercise every day, but speeding it up for the socials because no one wants to watch half an hour of of me. Go,
It does make me laugh. The last one that you were doing some sort of you were like in a mum's club or something, and it looked like you were in your pajamas. So I was like, at least didn't even get dressed for that
oh,
one.
they were just my colourful
I know.
leggings, Nick.
Everyone else
They're
was
my
like really
favourite
dour,
leggings.
and there you are in your jammies, just giving it some. But
I'd work
anyway,
around my jammies, to be fair.
that's that's not why we're here
But
today.
anyway, yes, no, I have been weightlifting. I'm stronger now.
You're stronger.
So basically, I'm faster, I'm stronger. The authors don't stand a chance, and Tony didn't even see it coming.
No, no, I don't think he was watching for it, to be honest, because we don't normally go for non-fiction, but here we
That's
are.
true, yeah. He
But
was strolling around thinking, ah, those poor
he was
fiction authors,
safe.
watch out for that woman with her sack. But no.
So, listeners and viewers, we have Tony McMahon with us. Hello, Tony. Tell us a little bit
Hello.
about yourself.
I was swinging a kettlebell around earlier on, so I feel like and it was Pilates yesterday, so I feel like am I almost there?
Yeah,
Oh,
I've
yeah.
met my match.
Oh, thank God.
We
No,
still got you though.
you haven't seen me doing reformer Pilates. You have not met your match. That's exciting. It's
So,
a study in kind of middle-aged, middle-class decrepitude. I tell you
no,
that. But yeah, well, good evening from the study in South London.
good
That's a
evening.
lovely book collection behind you
That
there.
is, I expect nothing less
Yeah,
from a
that's a
historian.
beautiful wall.
Uh, I have actually read some of them. It's not a fake one, but
Is it just the screen?
Yeah, it's a
no,
green
no, no.
screen.
I always get asked that. People say, "Oh, you haven't read any of those, have you?" I have to bring them out and go, "No, no, they're all thumbed, all thumbed." But I've had some of these for 40 years. That they've all got little stories attached to them.
Oh,
Wow.
and we're going to be talking to you about two books. So for this first episode, we're going to be doing my favorite subject, Jack the Ripper. So
I'm just going
Tony,
to
tell us.
sit back and relax for a bit,
No,
to be
you're not,
fair.
Lisa. You're going to get involved too.
I'm not sure you can relax during this.
No.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, I mean, I know we chatted before about this, but I was just basically asked to go on a telly show, a documentary series, and chat about the American suspect in the Jack the Ripper case, a guy called Francis Tumblety. And I'll freely admit, I didn't really know much about him, but as a former journalist, I can be an expert in an afternoon. So I went off and started to read about this guy, Francis Tumblety, who was the American suspect in the case, Irish American. And the more I read about him, because I went back to the original newspapers, because I love reading old 19th century newspapers, because the Victorian journalists had a really far more salacious and kind of evil way of writing about things than you might expect. They're not all prim and as you might imagine. And they wrote about this guy, Francis Tumblety. And what emerged was not only was he a suspect in the Jack the Ripper case, but 25 years before, he was arrested as a suspect in the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. And I thought, well, how on earth does the same person get arrested in 1865 in the United States over the Lincoln case, and then 25 years later gets arrested in London over the Jack the Ripper murders? Two of the biggest crimes of the 19th century, and this guy is attached to them. And I have to say, it became very obvious quite early on, and my ears pricked up as an LGBT man that Tumblety was definitely gay. So that, of course, raises all sorts of questions about, well, could he be Jack the Ripper? And I explained why, yes, he could, unfortunately. Massive misogynist, and I can unpack that a bit for you. But just a really odd guy, very an early example of celebrity. He was well known in the United States as a kind of quack doctor, massive self-publicist. He was always buying columns in the columns of classified ads in the newspapers, promoting himself as I can cure anything, cancer, pimples, you name it. He'd ride into any city in America dressed in this ridiculous plumed helmet and military costume on a circus horse with his assistant dressed as a Native American and these two greyhounds. And he publicized his medical business, which was selling quack cures basically. But he was hounded out of town over and over again. Had up fraud, had up for what they call gross indecency. He liked to cruise guys basically at night. He was had up for the manslaughter of two of his patients, which is, where my suspicions began to, increase. Um, and then, as I say, he was arrested in 1888 as a suspect in the Jack the Ripper case. And I'll leave this thought with you, for I shut up, was that when Scotland Yard, and he wasn't known in England, by the way, when Scotland Yard asked their American counterparts, do you know about this Francis Tumblety guy? Well, first of all, they said, yeah, do we ever? I mean, he's got a criminal record for God knows what, as long as your arm. But interestingly, at his dinner parties, this is what they told Scotland Yard, he has this cabinet of curiosities in another room where he takes his guests and he opens up this cabinet and inside are glass jars containing women's uteruses. And that's his kind of party piece. And of course, Scotland Yard thought, well, hang on a moment. The guy we're looking for, Jack the Ripper, eviscerates his victims and removes their organs. And at least in two of the cases, removes their uteruses. So of course, ding-a-ling-a-ling, they began to think, okay, well, this is the guy. And the only reason he never got taken to court was he jumped bail and escaped and went back to America. So that's really what got me. And like, do you know, the more I found out about him, the more I thought I have got to write a book about this guy because he's like a typical rogue in an unregulated capitalism of the 19th century, but he's also potentially implicated in two murders. And the more I looked at it, the more I found that yeah, the evidence stacked up for both the crimes actually.
So you tumble-teed down a red rabbit hole of research.
Oh, heavens to Murgatroyd. Well, it's a good job I like research because it was like one, I mean it's I had to immerse myself in the American Civil War period. And the kind of which comes before the Gilded Age, but we're leading up to that kind of,
Mm.
that kind of America. And he I found out, for example, that he employed one of the gang that killed Lincoln, or a guy called David Herold, who was hanged. So that's pretty damn suspicious. And then I found a newspaper article from 50 years later, an interview with an American police captain, where this American police captain said, oh, yeah, I used to see Tumblety hanging out with John Wilkes Booth, he's the guy who shot Lincoln. I used to see him hanging out with here in Buffalo. And oh, and by the way, you know that he also knew Mary Surratt, who owned the hotel where the conspirators used to meet. Mary Surratt was also hanged. So Tumblety employed one of the guys who was hanged, David Herold, introduced Mary Surratt, the woman who was hanged, to John Wilkes Booth, and he's seen hanging out with John Wilkes Booth. So I thought, well, okay, I can see why he was arrested as a suspect. He was let out of prison eventually and let free after they'd hanged, all these other people that he'd known. But I mean, to talk about suspicious, wow.
Do you think it was actually all the same person? Because sometimes when you look back, there's actually you can't quite identify. So, or sometimes it's father and son as well, isn't it? If they have the same name, can that
Well,
happen?
the thing about Tumblety was he was kind of hard to miss. And he nobody kind of mistook anybody else for Tumblety. I mean, some of the headlines in the newspapers at the time used to have things like, "Oh, Tumblety" or "Tumblety again." It was like a world weariness. Here he goes again. And one journalist even wrote, said, is he doing this deliberately to promote his medical business? Getting involved in all these crimes and capers. Because if he is, it's a really dangerous game to play. You know. And actually, when he's arrested in 1888 as a suspect in the Ripper case, he was initially arrested for gross indecency with four men. And it was only when Scotland Yard began to look into him and talk to their American counterparts, they started putting two and two together. But, a lot of people were interviewed in the American newspapers when he was arrested over the Ripper case. They went back and talked to old friends, colleagues, the Pinkerton Detective Agency as well. They'd been trailing him for decades. They were obsessed with him. They went and talked to them. Everybody said, yeah, he's Jack the Ripper. Everybody. Nobody stood up to defend Tumblety. They all said, that guy, definitely.
You know who doesn't think he's the Ripper,
Gone,
Tony?
gone.
That one, Nicky.
Oh well, everybody's got their.
Their
You know,
favourite.
She's got a full file, and she's presented this to me on
all
several
right.
occasions about her argument. But he sounds like such a character, and I kind of get. I mean, I do kind of get that thing that maybe he was just trying to insert himself or be on the periphery of these
Yeah.
things to make himself,
To take advantage of
yeah,
the
get his name
newspapers and the
known.
media.
I mean, I think there's, and by the way, I'm not sort of saying, oh, I'm 100% certain. So I'm not one of those people, says, oh, it's Walter Sickert or it's,
Fight,
Mm.
fight,
Freemasons,
fight,
all that stuff.
fight,
I mean,
fight, fight.
but, but having said that, I mean, no, I think, okay, if I was listing off, why do I think it's Tumblety? I think one of the things that, everybody notes is his violent misogyny. I mean, he's even quoted in the papers when anybody talk. By the way, his dinner parties have no women. No women are invited.
Mm.
And somebody actually says at one of his dinner parties, "Why are there no women here?" And he goes, "I," and he just goes into a whole stream of abuse about women that I won't even repeat. He also says he writes an autobiography, and he says that he was married to a woman, but she turned out to be a prostitute. And of course, that's another thing that Scotland Yard pick up. He has this hatred of prostitutes. He says that his own first wife, and he followed her and he found her going into a brothel and so on. So he has this hatred of sex workers. And I think as well, the thing about Tumblety is he is desperate for respectability. Every time he's arrested, by the way, he's got an extraordinary amount of money and diamonds on him. And the police rob him every time, basically. But he makes repeat fortunes. He's a story of, he basically started out in poverty, but he makes one fortune after another, but he never gets respectability, which I think kind of must drive him
Mm.
nuts. And an interesting thing he wrote, which really stuck in my mind, he says in this kind of this is quite late on in his life. He says, "Oh, people only take doctors seriously who cut people open. If you're dealing in herbs and medicine, they don't. You've got to cut people open," which kind of made me think, was he indulging in some gross ritual form of surgery to kind of like, in his frustration, because he has certainly had no shortage of frustration. And the other thing I point out as well is I noticed that he kept going to a place called Hot Springs in Arkansas after he got back from London. And I thought, well, what goes on at Hot Springs, Arkansas at that time? And it's syphilis treatment. So he has syphilis, and it's obviously an advanced stage after he gets back. Now, of course, as we know, in those days, it used to drive you ultimately completely mad. So that cannot have been good for his mental well-being. And I just chuck in as well, people often don't look at what happened to him when he got back to New York. But when he got back to New York, guess what? There's a Ripper style killing of a woman called Carrie Brown. Um, and you may ask, well, why does Tumblety he never gets sent to prison for any of the things he's alleged to have done. The manslaughters, two manslaughters, the fraud, the cottaging. And I think the reason for that, he's very good at networking and building networks to protect him around him. He funds political campaigns. He always stays in the swankiest hotels where he can network with people. So he's very good at networking. There's one case where he beats up what's obviously a young male prostitute on the streets. This is after he's got back, by the way, from London. There's another crime, and this one is definitively linked to him. Goes to court, and the New York District Attorney turns up in court to get the case closed down, to get the trial stopped, and to say Tumblety that no, I know Tumblety, he's not this kind of guy. Now, why on earth would the New York DA turn up to defend, somebody like Tumblety, who's been implicated in the Ripper case and in the Lincoln case? Why? And I think it's he's got these networks around him. Maybe it's Irish. conjecture that he may also have gay networks around him. Men, shall we say, they may not call themselves gay or homosexual, but they're men of a certain, uh, like myself, of a certain disposition. I don't murder people though, but that. So I'm thinking that's the way he kind of insulated himself. Oh, and I should mention as well something called the Little Child Letter, which I didn't discover. A police officer in London discovered, a retired police officer discovered, which was a letter from a retired Scotland Yard detective who investigated the Ripper case. He's writing to a retired crime journalist, and this is around the First World War, so it's years and years later after the Ripper case. And he basically says, "We were convinced it was Tumblety." And he says, we thought he was, and he calls it psychosexualis. We thought he was a sadistic homosexual, basically, who was capable of anything. So there's a lot of bits. Whether it coheres into a whole, well,
You
I
know
leave that
what?
to you, dear reader.
I was going to say, thank goodness it's not now. Imagine what a dangerous person someone like that would be.
I mean, all over social media.
Like,
He was already
yeah.
creating his own content back
If
then.
you, yeah, if you can make networks and you can network and connect with people and protect yourself and have money, make money and have plenty of money, then
Well, but
not.
Gina, but doesn't it resonate with our own times? Celebrities who have a dark side, who think they're
Mm,
beyond,
above the
blah
law.
blah blah, et cetera, et cetera, who live on an island. Let's not go there. But so it's. I think in a way he is the first, one of the first examples of something that we know only too well in our own time. And regardless of whether or not he was the Ripper, he's definitely. I mean, the first manslaughter, by the way, he's implicated in. He's got a practice in Canada. It's in New Brunswick, and he's supposed to appear in court. To it's a guy called James Portmore who's basically died very suspicious circumstances. Tumblety, the American newspapers gleefully report that Tumblety's seen on a white horse, literally galloping out of Canada in the direction of Maine across the border, and he's stolen the guy's organs out of the mortuary. And all of this is reported in the newspapers as a bit of a what a wheeze, what a chap Tumblety is, isn't he hilarious, And it's that kind of reporting. So and so that's an example of him running from justice, and I think that's what and he definitely does that with the Ripper case as well. He, pays his bail and then jumps, shipped to France and then off to New York, and never gets extradited, but gets followed by English detectives. Never extradited though, for some reason.
I can't think of another serial killer who was gay but then killed women.
And then,
Because normally it's a gay man who'll kill other gay men.
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't know whether it's an access thing or but I can't think of another killer that did that.
Of course, I suppose the question is, it's the old thing about is it for sex or power or other, other
Yeah.
reasons, and that's kind of what I try to explore. And it's interesting that, when Tumblety was alive, some pretty questionable stuff was being written. It was the early decades of psychology and psychiatry. There's a guy actually in the Union Army in Lincoln's Army during the Civil War, a guy called Hammond, who becomes the Surgeon General. And he writes, I got his book out actually, and his book is just full of, and here's another example of how homosexuals basically are, psychotic and evil and capable of anything and blah 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 blah. Though interestingly, he talks about men living as husband and wife and all some positive things, but most of it is highly negative. So I think the Victorians had no difficulty getting their heads around the idea of how a guy, might be so twisted and contorted that he would do something like that. So I don't think it was definitely not sex. It's not definitely not
Hmm.
sexual with the Ripper. There's something else, going on there. Extremely violent, obviously, an appalling end for these women.
Well, in
And I
his
just
mind, he might have been trying to kind of hone his craft. And
that's
because
what
he
I'm.
didn't really think of women as people, he was using them as the kind of because it was very much. I mean, if you look at the Mary Kelly at the very end, that was definitely someone playing, wasn't it? That had the
Yes,
time and the
yes,
privacy to be able to peel back layers of stuff and be able to really get his
yes,
hands in. So that I could probably get behind in terms of he could have been doing that because also at the time there was a lot of like body thieving. because
Yes.
they weren't
Yeah.
allowed to have cadavers for that in medical
Yeah.
science. So perhaps the only way he thought he could learn is through that. And also being a gay man, the woman might have trusted him more.
Completely, and I think that's one of the, it's interesting that I've got a copy of the Times here from that year where one of the early suffragettes says, God, if we'd only had women working for Scotland Yard, we'd have just, we'd have cracked this crime already by talking to other women and how, they feel that that guy might have operated. But I mean, Tumblety, by the way, was incredibly charming.
Mm.
He's very charming, and in fact, it even says in what there's a poem written about him that says that women swooned over him. He's tall. He's got this big walrus moustache, or thing that ladies liked at that time. And he's a presence, but he's got no interest in women. And when he's asked about women, he's just completely and utterly vile in terms of. And he, by the way, he employs the young men that he seduces. He employs them in his pharmacy. And there's a thing that's repeated over and over again. He employs them in his pharmacy, then they steal from him, then he goes to court, you know, because to accuse them of theft, and then they counter accuse him of assault, sexual assault, basically, and then the whole thing collapses. And he does this over and over again in the United States and in England. And people remark on it, saying, here we go again. He's employed one of his valets, as they call them, and it all ends, in a kind of sordid court battle. So he's a strange character, a very odd character.
Looking at a picture, I've got pulled up a picture of him because I wanted to see what he looked like. And the one that they share the most, the one that is on the page where you might go for research initially, or the first page that might come up, he reminds me of Robin Williams in Night at the Museum, up on the horse with that. So he does. So, and I love Robin Williams. So he does look kind of trustworthy and kind of like he could charm me, I think.
Oh, and there were quite a few people like him at the time. There were lots of people with invented pasts, and you got to imagine this is an unregulated world.
Yeah.
There's no regulation, there's no libel laws to speak of. People could. He used to claim he used to produce testimonials from Charles Dickens, and even after Lincoln died, he had the cheek to produce testimonials from Lincoln as well, saying Lincoln had, said he was a fabulous doctor and so on. There's one intriguing thing as well. Towards the When he does come back to the United States, journalists are following him. American journalists are following him, as well as English detectives who do keep following him. And he's hanging out with this guy who they call Jack the Texan, who's like he's described as snake-like appearance. He's been with him for quite a few years. He more than likely took him to England with him because by the way, he flits between the United States and England. Should explain that. He's got a business in America, but he starts to work increasingly in England, where he's got family from the Irish side of his family. So that's why he's flitting over to Liverpool and London. And he takes this guy called Jack, who they call Jack the Texan. And American journalists say, well, could this guy have helped Tumblety to actually have committed the murders? And they speculate about this quite openly. If Tumblety was getting on a bit, he's in his 50s, whatever, which is obviously old by the standards, plus he's got syphilis, did Jack the Texan kind of, hold him down while, Francis Tumblety did whatever, whatever. And the fact that they talk about this, I mean, just seems so horrific at the time. And yet it's not followed up on, because there's a kind of laxer approach to things in the 1880s, 1890s.
Well, before the canonical five, there was another woman that was attacked by who she said was two soldiers, one older and one younger.
Yes.
And that has been partially linked to the Jack the Ripper killers, although not considered officially one of them.
Yes.
But she died in hospital from her injury. She was just left in the gutter to die and died in hospital of her injuries. So they couldn't get much of a description out of her. But to say two soldiers with him dressing as he did and his friend,
Yeah. Yeah.
you could argue that.
Yeah, no, no, for sure. And of course, the whole issue with the canonical murders is that that's only something that was set in stone later on. Of course,
Mm.
there's still, Martha Tabram, for example, who died in appalling circumstances, could possibly have been a Ripper victim. But I think one of the reasons that Tumblety eventually they give up is that there are other murders after, the canonical five are murdered. And possibly Scotland Yard thought, well, it's not him because, there's been another murder in the East End. Now, we know he was there for the five canonical murders. He was in London, he was there right time, and he admits that he was in Whitechapel. He even says in one interview that he was dressed inappropriately. He was a bit too, a bit too, and he says, "Oh, that's why they were following me because I stood out. I was wearing a slouch hat." He says, that's why they came after me." Um, so, unlike some of the other suspects that get mentioned, who were not actually even in London at the time, Tumblety was there. He was there, the right place, the right time for the canonical five. Yeah.
Yeah.
And didn't you suggest, Nikki, that there were also some copycats, that there might have been,
Yeah, I
but it was
kind of
difficult to know
suspected.
which ones specifically are Ripper murders.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Liz Stride was perhaps not one of his, partially. I don't know. I just think there was that night where there was two,
Yes.
which to me was quite difficult to kind of get my head around the fact he could be. It was almost like he teleported from one place to another to be able to commit the second crime as far away from the other one. And I just kind of felt, no, I, and also if you think about it, I mean, Whitechapel in Victorian England, it it was almost a death sentence for most women or
Mm.
children. If you were in a vulnerable position, then, the odds of you being hurt or killed were quite high around then anyway. So there could
Yeah.
have been a lot of different murders and attacks that perhaps wasn't, you know, linked to the Jack the Ripper murders that could have happened. I mean, we're talking about a time where the rule of thumb, wasn't it, started where a man could beat his wife with a stick as long as it was no thicker than his thumb, and that was
Yeah.
legal.
Yeah. I mean, I think for women, it was just, I mean, the point's been made. I know, for example, in the five, Harry Rubenholt made the point that, a lot of these women came from, relatively kind of, sort of middle class, lower middle class backgrounds. And I mean, I think there was no safety net really. The welfare state was, decades away, and if you fell, you kept falling basically. And your circumstances changed, your husband died, left you, whatever. And I know we've talked about this before, but you woke up in the morning and you had to make money to have someone to sleep in that night, a flop house or whatever. So it's a pretty grim grind for survival, and you are very vulnerable to any kind of psychopath, serial killer, abuser, that's out there. And I'm sure I mean, Whitechapel was a pretty damn squalid place.
Yeah, it's certainly
Now.
not somewhere you want to go back to. Not now.
Not now.
It's been gentrified. It's fine now.
Well,
Well,
well, quite, yeah. I mean, now you go to. I mean, I popped down there. I think I was down there the other day actually. You go to a lovely. In fact, I was down there on Saturday. I went to a lovely bistro, French bistro, Chazelle. Though I've promoted it now. But had a lovely and quite expensive meal. But yeah, I mean, it's the Whitechapel has evolved massively, and the people who live there and so on. It's always been a huge kind of throughput of I mean, it was a massive Jewish community at that time, and a lot of the accusations that were made had massive anti-Semitic, anti-Eastern European overtones. Anybody with ski at the end of their surname was seemed like a suspect. So again, no change, I'm afraid to say, with some
the
of our
world
news
doesn't
coverage today.
change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it really was it flips and flops, isn't it, between standing out and not standing out. And actually for Francis, it was you don't want, it's very dangerous to stand out, but he also seemed to manage to use it to protect himself a bit as well. So wonder what he would think if he went to modern day Whitechapel. Do you think he'd enjoy the bistro, Tony?
Oh God, well, he stayed at the best hotels. I mean, and he boasts about it. But you see, here's the dilemma that somebody like him had. Is that he had to stand out to make money. And there's I actually write about some of the other weird frauds that there was a guy who convinced everybody he was a Hungarian general, an account, right? And he ended up commanding a regiment in the American Civil War. I think it's Count Dustasi is called. And he gets money, and women fall in love with him in Washington, D.C. And he wears his very exuberant uniforms. And then it emerges that back in his native Hungary, he was a circus trainer, and he was not a count, and he ends up getting sent to Sing Sing to prison. Because but there was there was just it was just a time when people you would adopt a persona, and you would use that to get rich, because what else could you do if you wanted to get ahead in society? The traditional rich weren't going to help you, so to climb out of the gutter, you had to kind of resort to all kinds of chicanery, and if you were ambitious, which Tumblety undoubtedly was, but unfortunately, before we sympathized too much with him, there came a load of baggage with
Yeah.
it, which got
Mm.
worse as he got older. So yeah.
And
But
times haven't
this,
changed much, have they,
I was gonna
really? Yeah.
say, really, that's it, isn't it? Go viral on TikTok and YouTube, and that is, and
As
then
you
there
know,
are
Lisa.
do extreme things. The cat's in training for a skydive. That'll get us a few views. But
Oh
it
my
is. People do absolutely extreme, and we've seen crimes. Don't
Yeah.
f with cats as an example, isn't it? Of where we've
Mm.
seen these crimes unfold online, or lots of people, because I'm really interested in like the family vloggers and all the darkness that
Yeah.
comes with them. And you see a lot where there's sort of family vlogging, but actually behind that, there's some really dark, horrible stuff going on. But there's this perception of what we're sending out to the world. So no, I don't think things have changed at all. I do what I often wonder though, how, when we talk about history and we talk about historical figures like Francis, I kind of think like, how did he fit that much in? Because I know he didn't live that long. So
Yeah.
you often hear of people, don't you, where they've had, oh yeah, he was, well, the other person you were talking about, there was a circus performer, and then he was this, and then he was this, and then he was that, or, like the story of, I love Hamilton. So the story of, Hamilton and all the different things he did, you're kind of like, how did they fit it all in? And when people talk about us in the future, in history, they're going to be
Well,
like, they did a job for 40 years and then they died. Occasionally at the weekend, they went places. That was it.
there was no Netflix back then. They had to make their own fun, didn't they?
It's
Well,
true.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember the pre-digital era where, we went out and made our own fun. But but the thing about dear old, the thing about Tumblety is he's getting hounded out of, one city after another. I mean, in one city, he's even accused of being a Confederate spy, and that's during the Civil War. He has to leave in a big hurry. But so I think in a way, he's got no option. He has to keep going city, 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 because he's basically being rumbled, in each city. And by the way, doctors in these cities gang up on him as well because he attacks mainstream doctors by name in his adverts. Doctor so and so, doctor so and so don't know what they do. So of course they all gang up on him to get rid of him. But the police are after him. The Pinkerton Detective Agency are on his case all the time. So, and he has to. He's made a fortune. He loses it again, and he has to go to another city and build up another fortune. And he just it's like a cycle that repeats over and over again. And I don't know how he didn't, go completely bonkers, frankly, leading that kind of life, which, on the one hand he's got money, but the other hand he's like a roving, itinerant. He's never able to put his bags down and establish himself anywhere because he's unfortunately he's a victim of his own persona, and so journalists, police, they're all after him, and as I say, incredibly, he's then implicated in two massive crimes. Now, the big question is, how does that happen? Why is the same? Is it just that he's being, victimized, vilified, and he's got nothing to do with it? Um, but he dances awful close to those crimes, and as I say, he employs two of the people linked, or he employs one of the people linked to the Lincoln murder, and seems to know two of the others. Why is he getting so close to these crimes? Why does he go to Whitechapel? Indeed, after to go and gawp and rubberneck, at what's going on. So I don't know. He's a very strange character, and I have to say, on one level, I kind of enjoyed writing the book
Mm.
because every decade I went through in the newspapers, there was just I did. Oh, let's do the 1850s today, the 1860s. There's something else. There'd never ceased to be something about this man, all the way through to the 80s. And he dies in 1903. Walks into a hospital in St. Louis, and there's a story about his end. By the way, when they search his body, after he dies, yeah, they find a load of jewels as usual and money on, and then it turns out he's actually got a big fortune when he dies, and his family fight over it in the courts. But then he has these two very simple rings. It's a kind of like a $2 wedding ring and what they call a keeper ring. Very, very simple. And some people, not I haven't it's not my theory, but some ripperologists have wondered whether they were Annie Chapman's rings, Jack the Ripper's second victim, because Scotland Yard hunted for those rings because they knew they were missing. And the pathologist actually said two things missing from Annie Chapman: her rings and her uterus. I mean, that's how appalling people wrote at the time. But they scoured the pawnbrokers and everything to try and find these damn rings. And so some people thought, of course, why Tumblety would never have cheap rings on him. Everything he had was, he'd have the best jewelry. Why does he have these two cheap rings? Is it appalling thought of the day, a memento, a keepsake from one of his murders, that of Annie Chapman? That is a theory that's also been floated.
I feel like Hamilton got a musical. How come Tumblety hasn't had a musical yet? Because that would make it such a fun one.
I know. Maybe I've got to write the Netflix script. I mean, I'm just.
I think you need to do that, Tony. I think that's your next job.
Well, we could co-write it. If you're out on a limb there.
I don't know whether I could write a musical. That might be stretching it a bit.
That reminded me of P.T. Barnum as well, and he's also got a musical. So
I'm not sure how many things I can rhyme with uterus.
But that is very interesting, Lisa, that you say that, because, bing bong, Tumblety himself likened himself to P.T. Barnum.
Oh.
So you're
on the same page as him.
You're on the same page. You're getting to know him, I'm afraid. Yeah, he's into his vortex. Yeah.
But I suppose it's similar of the time again, isn't it? That kind of showmanship. And
so have you already cast Hugh Jackman then as Francis Tumblety in our show?
Oh no, but who could we cast?
Oh, you'd have to be tall.
Cast? Yeah,
Bill Skarsgård
musical.
Does he sing?
Sing. Yeah, Skarsgård. Yeah, Skarsgård actually.
There's an auto-tune.
He's my favourite one.
Well, we get him to grow a moustache.
Yeah. Stick a big moustache on him.
We stuck one on DiCaprio now. Would he look the part? No, he's not big enough. He's not big enough.
No, he's not tall enough.
No, I think tall and handsome.
Tall
I think
and kind of lanky
in a way. Yeah, kind of not necessarily standard handsome, but quite piercing, quite striking kind of looking. I think.
Yeah.
Or maybe who? Because I think he can sing, can't he? But I can't remember. Oh, I'm having menopausal mum moment. No, I can't remember his name. But the one who was in Star Wars, who also then done
Chris Pine.
No.
No,
the really tall guy with dark hair. He was Darth something or other in one of the film.
Not Adam something.
Yes.
The one who's in Star Wars.
Yeah.
I know. Because
I don't know why I think he can sing. For some reason, I seem to think he can sing. I did listen to a really interesting, I think it was a TED talk with him once about how he got into acting. He's Adam Driver.
Adam Driver.
That's it. It came eventually. It came.
I think the musical aspect might be a bit ambitious. Like I said, I'm not sure how many things I can rhyme with uterus to make that work.
Could you imagine what the song would be? Actually, I was just thinking, young Russell Crowe actually.
Like two to us in his cabinet, the uterus. You could do a whole number about look like two to us in the cabinet with uterus. No.
I like big uterus.
Oh no, I just thought. How about if we went just the uterus? Oh no.
Oh no, yeah. I can slash you if I try.
Well, that's what we'll be working on for Christmas then, Nick.
Well, Tony's got a whole week to work on it because we've kidnapped him for a second episode to talk about his second book.
Yes.
I expect that to be done then.
So there we go. So he'll have all the nice and quiet in the rabbit hole.
I'll get to work on the libretto. Right.
Yes. Let's get some melodies in at least. So yes, so thank you, listeners and viewers, for sticking with us. And we will be keeping Tony for another week, like we said, to talk about next time. We're going to be talking about the Knights Templar. So I'm looking forward to that, going back in time even more.
Further in time machine.
Indeed. So do remember
exactly what it sounds like.
Do remember to follow the Red Rabbit wherever you get your socials, and Tony's links to the books if you want to read all about how Tumblety was associated with both the Jack the Ripper case and the Abe Lincoln shooting. You'll be able to buy his book from the links.
Well, huge thanks to the team there.
The Red Rabbit team, yay!
Yeah.
You've put some terrible thoughts in my head.
We do it
We do
every
that.
time.
Yeah.
That's our job.
See you next time,
See
guys.
you next time, guys.
Bye.
Bye.